Hi, I'm Chris Novelli of N3 Architecture, and today we're going to be starting to look at the process of designing a new custom home. I have been working on this project since early 2025, and it's currently in the construction drawing phase. And right now we're talking to contractors and coordinating with them. As you know, I feel very strongly about involving contractors as part of the development team from an early stage and discussing the constraints and the opportunities of the build with them during pre-construction and working together as a team to finalize details and selections so that the construction phase can go smoother and we foster this sort of team culture that involves all parties and everyone's on the same page. Just makes everything go so much better. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. We're going to rewind the clock to early 2025 when I was first contacted by the homeowners, and we're going to go through all of the decisions and the design work that was completed to get to the point that we're at now. If you've watched any of my videos in the past, you'll know that I put an incredible amount of resources and effort into both site analysis and performance programming. These two phases, which often occur simultaneously, have a bigger impact than almost anything else in creating a home that's specific to the property and specific to the individuals who will be living in the home. In my opinion, a home cannot be called custom if it does not include a deep dive into these two topics. Custom to some people might mean the products or the materials that are used, or the trim that's installed, or the hardware. But for me, custom design relates specifically to how the house relates to this specific place, this property that you've purchased and that you're developing on, and the way that the people will actually be using their home. While site analysis and performance programming are completed at the same time, today we're going to be looking at the site analysis phase. This property is located in Massachusetts and it's on a working farm which is surrounded by protected conservation land. The total property is about 9.64 acres, of which 7.64 is protected through a conservation restriction easement, meaning this area of the site can be used for farming activities, but it cannot be built upon. The remaining 2 acres is available to construct the new home. On this 2-acre section of the property, there exists a pretty large timber-framed hay barn and a smaller open-air wood pole barn, both of which will remain. The hay barn is currently being renovated and is in pretty good shape. The pole barn needs a little work. There was formerly a 2-story classical New England style farmhouse which was previously removed. This farmhouse had been constructed over a solid granite foundation, and all that granite has been saved and stockpiled and will eventually be reused in some creative ways. The 2-acre buildable section of the property is generally flat, and then the topography slopes down in all directions, especially to the west where it drops off considerably into a forested section of the property. Some other things to consider is that there are beautiful sunsets that can be seen from the site, and it also can get very windy, especially in the location where the house is built, which is sort of the crest or the peak of the hill, and the wind just sort of comes whipping up the hill and over the site. Energy efficiency and a nice tight building envelope will be key to maintaining comfort for the family. Prior to hiring N3 Architecture, the clients had engaged in the services of a farming consultant, and they had worked together on how the property will be used. This includes a grove of chestnut trees for agroforestry, vegetable and herb gardens, a fruit tree orchard with room for future expansion, a cut flower garden, grapevines, chickens, and other related farming activities and spaces on the property. While there will be some commercial aspect to the farming activities, it's generally a lifestyle farm that will support the family. And we've had many decisions from the early stages of working together on how the homeowner and their children will be in and out of the house during the day, gathering eggs and fruits and vegetables and herbs for their meals, how the children will have their farm chores that need to be done before heading off to school, and how the family generally wants to live in an organic, healthy lifestyle. And this house, including how the house is situated on the site, needs to support that. One of the first things that I do in a site analysis phase is a solar diagram. And this is done to understand where the sun will be located throughout the day and throughout the seasons of the year. While the farming activities have generally been laid out, we need to understand the relationship between the sun and the spaces within the house. Especially, as you will see in a later video, we will be incorporating an indoor greenhouse / sunroom for growing seeds during the winter months. But more on that later. For this solar diagram, you need to think of this not as a flat circle on a piece of paper, but consider it almost as a dome over the top of the property. And the location of each of these point markers represents the sun position on that hypothetical dome throughout the year. So in the summer, the sun is closer to the center, extending up at a much higher angle. And in the winter, it's down near the edge, near the horizon at a lower angle. Views are important, and on this property, we have 3 views to consider. First, to the north will be the view from the home to the garden. It's very important to the homeowner to be standing in their kitchen and be able to look out and see their garden, not just for easy access between harvesting and cooking, but also the view of that garden just makes them feel good. The next view is the long view down the hill towards the west. There's a lake down at the bottom of the hill, but we don't necessarily have a view of the water as it's blocked by the trees. That doesn't matter as much though, because the view is still beautiful, especially of the sunset, which I previously mentioned. The homeowner and I discussed in length, should this long view down the hill to the sunset be captured from the inside? Meaning, is this where we want the living spaces to look out towards? Eventually, what we landed upon is that they will mostly be experiencing this view from being outside, whether that's eating dinner together out on the patio or around the fire pit with their friends and family at dusk. And we don't need to put as much emphasis on capturing this view from inside the house, because it's the outside activities and the outside spaces that they're going to be using it for that will get that special moment. And then finally, there's a long view to the south. And this is important as there's a natural view corridor which happens from the build site between the existing hay barn and the trees at the corner of the property, and then down the length of this picturesque field. And this field is part of the protected conservation land, so it will never be built upon. Finally, while the streets surrounding this house are not necessarily busy, there is some road traffic and some road noise that occurs that we want to make sure we plan around and create as much of a buffer as possible. As I mentioned, this site can get pretty windy. Most of the winds in both the summer and the winter come up the hill from the west. In the winter, they come a little bit more from the northwest, and in the summer, a little bit more from the southwest, but it's generally in that direction that we're getting the primary winds. Then also in this area of the country, we get nor'easter storms, where these storms will sort of swirl down from Canada and come at you from the northeast, creating periods of heavy snow and precipitation. From here, I like to consider all the constraints and opportunities of the site. It has already been told to me that both barns will remain, but in regards to the smaller pole barn, which is in a little bit rougher shape, I didn't want that to be a barrier to creating a better design for the client. So in this analysis, I took some liberties in thinking that it has the possibility to be removed. What you see here in orange, I identified as the ideal build zone, which has access to the gardens, captures the north, west, and southern views, has a southern exposure, which is good for naturally melting the snow in the winter off your driveway, and also capturing all that natural daylight. I'm identifying a public zone towards the south where they might have a small farm stand, and noting the location of some physical barriers between this public area and the private areas of the site. Now, this could be a row of small trees or a fence or something else to separate the areas both physically and visually. I show the potential for some additional plantings to the west to block some of those winds, especially in the winter. Now, this could be a mix of both deciduous trees, which would provide shade in the summer but allow that sunlight to come in the winter months, and also evergreen trees, which will block the winds. And I'm also showing a little buffer area to the east at the road to block the street noise and views, thinking perhaps this might be where the pole barn gets rebuilt. From here, I created 7 design options. I don't always explore that many site options, but in this property with so many possibilities, I felt it would be best to fully exhaust them all. So each of these 7 options explores different possibilities. And from talking with the homeowner even before completing these options, I had a strong sense of what direction they would go in, but I do feel it's part of my job to not just give people what they want, but also show them some things and challenge them a little bit into what they might not have considered. Even if some of these different ideas aren't chosen, my goal is to create pause and reflection, which will either reinforce your original decision or it will intrigue you enough to explore it further. Getting into the options now. Option 1, this is the homeowner's original preferred layout. It places the home roughly in the same location as the historical farmhouse and maintains that classic relationship between the home and the barn. This arrangement is called big house, little house, back of house, barn, and it can be found in farmhouses throughout the New England region. Option 2 removes and reconstructs the pole barn out by the street and builds the home with its length against the west edge of the buildable area of the site. This will allow it to capture both the west and the southern views. The garage is located towards the east with a southern exposure, which will help in the winter months and also add to that buffer between the private, peaceful areas of the site and the public, noisy, road-facing areas of the site. The spaces between the 2 barns and the garage and the house becomes almost like a private courtyard or even more like a working yard where cars will be parked, tractors will be driving through, and it would have this nice sort of agricultural feel to the space. Option 3, here we're keeping the existing pole barn and showing the new home to the west of it, connected to the pole barn with the garage. This option places the home as far away from the public areas and the road as possible and would maintain the front of the property sort of as the working area. Option 4, this gets more to that ideal planning scenario that was explored in the site analysis sketch. The pole barn gets relocated to the east and the house and garage is built upon that east and west access, giving a full southern exposure. In this option, we could even have a big wraparound porch that extends the living space in all directions, along with some shade and windbreak trees to block some of that sun and wind. Option 5, this one gets a little silly with the things that we're exploring, and again, we relocate the pole barn as we did in other options, but now the new house is connected to the hay barn and the existing silo, and I thought it might be fun to reimagine the silo as part of the living space. Maybe this becomes a vertical library with a viewing platform at the top, or maybe it's an office. Here we still get that courtyard type arrangement that we saw in the previous options, but it's a little bit more compact, leaving more space to the north and west around the house for plantings and usable yard. Option 6 explores some of those similar traditional New England farmhouse relationships, but turns the main part of the house at a 90-degree angle to be more along the street, parallel to the street. I did make this sketch a little bit too large and place the home a little too close to the street, but since we're just working with big ideas at this point, that really didn't matter. Option 7 gets back to some of those more unrealistic thoughts. I'm using the house here to connect both the hay barn and the pole barn. This creates a rear courtyard between the 3 structures, and it could allow the homeowners and their children to have access to both of the barns without having to go outside. Each of these 7 conceptual site options contains their pros and their cons, and we spent a considerable amount of time reviewing, discussing, and analyzing which one would be best for their family. Something that came up, which the homeowner told me that they weren't necessarily considering, is that how much of the original historic farmhouse they wanted to honor. Not in replication, but in arrangement and in spirit. They talked about how this property is not just important to them, but important to people in the town, and how it's used as sort of a landmark for people to navigate the town. And this vision of this extended white farmhouse connected to the barn touches on nostalgia for the homeowner and their experiences on the site, and also for the people that live in the area. There are moments driving up to this property, especially from the south, where the barn and the historical farmhouse become visible, peeking through the trees and over the stone walls. And the homeowner wanted to recreate and respect that emotional connection as much as possible. If we chose one of the options that hid the new home to the northwest corner of the site, or tears down one of the barn structures and rebuilds them in a spot that could block the view of the home, ultimately those were not ideal to the spirit and the soul and the meaning that the homeowner was trying to create with this project. Site analysis is very important to help you understand the constraints and opportunities of your site. Even if your first instinct is the option that you ultimately select, this exploration is needed and can lead to a greater understanding of why you like something. We don't ever want to jump to arbitrary solutions.